Hello everyone, this is Jesse from Nox Corvus Gaming, and we are here today starting a new series of dungeon guides for all the dungeons in Final Fantasy XIV. Today we're starting with the game's first dungeon, Sastasha, so let's dive in. So Sastasha is unlocked at or around level 15. After the story quest, it's probably pirates. You can queue for the dungeon directly in the duty finder, or right outside the dungeon itself, which is located to the northeast of Aleport. Sastasha is an easy dungeon. It's meant to introduce new players to Final Fantasy's dungeons, and it is therefore very accessible for players of all skill levels. In this guide, I will swap between all the roles as necessary, but mainly focus on the tank role to illustrate the dungeon's mechanics. So first off, let's take a look at the various monsters we'll see in this dungeon and their respective mechanics. In the first section of Sastasha, you'll fight two types of enemies, Black Bats and Cave Aurelia. The Black Bats are simple enemies and have no effects you need to be aware of. The Cave Aurelia are similar, except they have a very small rectangular area of effect attack that is easily noticeable by the red glowing line painted on the floor. You will probably just not want to stand in that. Once you take care of the first four Black Bats, you'll see a small room off to the side with a small glittering bloody memo in it. Make sure to read this and keep track of the color noted at the bottom. This will come in handy later. Don't worry too much though, I'll remind you. After you fight your way through a few more Black Bats in Cave Aurelia, you will find the Cattery. This area likely has a few treasure chests scattered around it, so it might be beneficial for you to clear the entire room. There are three new enemies in the Cattery: Giant Clams, Shade Seekers, and Fossil Shells. The Fossil Shells do have a special attack, but generally you can treat them like the Black Bats with no mechanics. The Giant Clams and the Shade Seekers, however, share the first notable mechanic in this dungeon. The Shade Seekers are nothing to worry about on their own, but the Giant Clams constantly create more as long as they're alive. Your goal here is to destroy the Giant Clams as fast as possible so they can't spawn extra Shade Seekers. Make sure to only attack the Giant Clams when their shell is open though, otherwise they are invulnerable to any damage. So after you fought your way through all the Giant Clams, the Fossil Shells, and the Shade Seekers, you will come to the first boss in the dungeon, Chopper. Chopper is summoned as a result of a simple puzzle you need to complete in order to open the door. You might have guessed by now that the color mentioned in the note earlier corresponds to the color of coral that you need to activate in order to not spawn an additional enemy. There is really no wrong answer here, since whichever piece you activate will open the door. However, if you select the wrong one, a single enemy will spawn before Chopper, and the person who activated the coral will receive a poison debuff. Regardless of whether or not you picked the right piece of coral, an inconspicuous switch will appear on the back wall, and activating that will summon the boss. Chopper is a very easy boss with only one ability to watch out for. When his health bar is depleted to 70%, 40%, and then again at 20%, you will use an ability called Charged Whisker. The ability itself does no damage, but it will paralyze anyone inside the area of effect. After Chopper is down, you can proceed to the next area, Dead Man's Drink. This area, and the rest of the dungeon, aside from the bosses, consists of variants of the same two enemies, Reavers and Scurvy Dogs. There are multiple types of Reavers, but the only real difference is their weapon, and this really only matters when dealing with the ranged variant. If you are tanking, try to fight near the ranged Reavers, which will make it easier for the damage dealers in the party to hit them with area of effect attacks. This leads us into the Rambade and into our second boss fight with Captain Madison. Captain Madison has two additional enemies with him, both are standard Reavers. I suggest taking down the Reavers first, since they each deal somewhat comparable damage to the boss and have much less health. Therefore, you're ending up with a lot less strain on your tank and your healer. There's not much in the way of boss abilities here, just beat him up until he runs away, which will happen when he gets to around 50% of his health. Aside from a couple of boss encounters, there's not much else that needs to be mentioned about the rest of the dungeon. Just remember that if you're tanking, try to pull groups that you feel are manageable for yourself and your healer. Once you've cleared as much of this area as you want to, make sure to head to this room first. You'll need to take down a roided up Reaver in order to obtain a key to continue the dungeon. Following the path after you unlock the gate will bring you to our old pal Captain Madison again, with the same two Reaver guards. Well, not the same two for obvious reasons. Anyway, he does have one additional mechanic this time around. At about 50%, Captain Madison will open a cage containing 5 scurvy dogs. If you're tanking, make sure you're ready to hit those with an area of effectability. If you're not tanking, make sure to give the tank a moment to hit them before you attack them, and if you're a healer, it might be a good idea to run to your tank, so if you accidentally pull by healing, it'll move right into the tank's area of effectability. Once he hits about 25%, he'll run away yet again, this time opening the last room of the dungeon. This room is pretty straightforward, but be aware that some of the groups have patrolling enemies. These can be dangerous and will lure additional enemies into combat with you, so be aware of this when you pull and just try to pull enemies back to where you are rather than running to them where they are. There are also several groups of enemies towards the back of the room that can be avoided by tightly hugging the left wall. Alright, so this is your official spoiler warning. If you don't want to see who the last boss is or learn about how to defeat the last boss, then stop the video here. Otherwise, we are going to go ahead and continue on to the last boss. So here we are now. We made it. The last boss of the dungeon. Den Orca-Toothed. Yeah, that's right. Den is comparatively much more difficult than the rest of the dungeon simply because he has a variety of abilities and mechanics to deal with. Make a note of the unnatural ripples seen around the arena. At around 80%, again at 60%, and finally at 40%, Den will cause 2, 3, and 4 of these unnatural ripples to bubble. A player can interact with the bubbles to disable them. If they are not disabled though, a baleen guard will spawn. This isn't the end of the world, the guards are not very dangerous and are easily brought down, but they can get annoying if your tank is not ready to grab them. If they do spawn, the same rules apply as with scurvy dogs when fighting Captain Madison the second time. In addition to that, Den will use 3 abilities. The first 2 are True Thrust and Jumping Thrust. They deal a moderate amount of damage and are unavoidable, meaning that there is no tell, no area of effect, just a spike of damage on the tank. Healers will want to be on alert for this and make sure that the tanks don't get too low, otherwise it could catch them by surprise. The last ability is called Hydro Ball, which is a moderately sized cone effect that you will want to make sure you're not caught in. In addition to moderate damage, it will also silence anyone caught in it, meaning that you cannot use most spells or abilities until the debuff wears off. While this is a lot compared to the other bosses in the dungeon so far, it's not very difficult in practice. Most groups will get it on their first try, and if not, you'll get a good understanding for the mechanics and should have a much easier time on your second attempt. Alright, well this has been our Nox Corvus dungeon guide for the Sastasha dungeon. Thanks so much for watching. Please leave a comment below if I made a mistake with any of the information I presented, or let me know if it was helpful, or if there's anything else you'd like to see added in future videos. If you like the video, please give us a thumbs up and make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you get updates when we post more dungeon guides. Have a great day everyone, and good luck in Sastasha.